organization when it comes to this illegal immigration stuff, and most of it is from the Democrat Party. They legitimately, or I wasn't legitimate, but they literally opened up the border and allowed every illegal person that they can possibly find to allow them to come into our country, to flood our cities so they can win elections forever.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I stumbled across this video where Piers Morgan brings together Officer Tatum, Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks, and Constantine Kisin for what was supposed to be a civil debate on immigration. But let me tell you, things get heated real fast when Brandon Tatum decides he is done playing nice and just starts calling out what he sees as the real agenda behind open border policies. Cenk tries to do his usual deflection thing, blaming billionaires and the donor class. But Tatum is not having it and drops some truth bombs that honestly left me speechless. So make sure you watch until the end, and please comment down below where you are watching from. I really love to see people from all over the world connecting in here. All right, now, let's get into the video.
Exactly.
Yeah, first of all, you're all racist, and I cancel all of you. Okay, so no, nobody's talking about that anymore. Okay. So listen, there's two different issues on immigration in America. First is, are we allowing too many immigrants in? So let me give you some context on that. For the first time since the 1960s, the number of foreign-born people in America has gone down by 1 million people. And by the way, you can say, hey, the American people kind of like that. That's why they like that Trump, stopped the people coming in from the border. And that's a fair point, right? But are we in some sort of immigrant emergency here in America? No, the number of immigrants are going down, not up. And further context, so about 15% of Americans are foreign born. If that seems like a high number to you, it's much higher in other countries, 22% in Canada, 29% in Switzerland, 30% in Australia. So we don't have some sort of immigration emergency in that sense here. So that context is super important. Nevertheless, I understand that people are wary of change, and sometimes change doesn't bring positive things, right? Or it might bring a lot of positive stuff, but has some negative consequences. So we have to make rational decisions here. Part of the problem, Piers, is that it leads to the second issue, which is that people want you to look at immigrants and say that's the real problem. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't want you to look up. So the guy coming in across the border in America, just across the Rio Grande, doesn't have any money, doesn't have any power. He didn't rig the system against you. The donor class in America did. And they desperately don't want you to know that, so they want you to get angry at immigrants instead. So I think the number one source of discontent here in the U.S., and I would bet that it's the same in the U.K., is not the raw numbers. It's that we feel that our government isn't delivering for us. So, the right wing says America first. These days on the Young Turks, we say Americans first. It's because we never get anything. And you see, it's not like these immigrants that are, for example, in Chicago, where people were complaining about it, including, by the way, black and brown communities in Chicago, right? And they were getting a certain stipend, and the stipend's not huge or anything, but as a resident of Chicago, they were looking at that and thinking, I'm not getting anything. And now all of a sudden these guys are getting something. It's not much, but it's something. So why do I never get anything? And the real answer to that, of course, has nothing to do with immigrants. It has to do with the richest people in the country and mainly corporate rule that has decided that they're going to extract all of our wealth in the form of $35 billion in oil subsidies, endless wars that enrich the defense contractors, and by the way, create waves of new immigrants as unrest in those countries occur. So if you really want to fix these problems, you have to look at the donors and the people in power, the people setting the rules, rather than just hating on new immigrants that came in.
Officer Tatum, one of the big flashpoints in the UK, as I mentioned, these small boats just coming in all the time on the southern border with illegal immigrants pouring in. And then once they get there, the government in the UK feeling obliged to house them, and they're putting them up often in rather nice hotels. And the flashpoint there is, why are these asylum seekers, many of them, they all claim to be, but they're not all legitimate asylum seekers. For example, a year and a half ago, they discovered 15,000 of the year total number who come in on the small boats actually turned out to be young, economic, male Albanians from Albania, which is not a war-torn country. So they weren't genuine asylum seekers. They were economic migrants seeking a better life for themselves. Nothing wrong with that, but they needed a proper process of going through the legal way of getting in. So there's a lot of anger that's been building up by people living through a cost of living crisis, can't afford to feed their kids. Real problem with public services as the UK population continues to rise. 50 million back in the 50s, nearly 70 million now. Crumbling health service because it can't cope with the extra volume of people. Education, all the public services creaking at the seams. And then they have this constant flashpoint of these people coming in illegally and seemingly in many cases being treated better than people already in the country who are there perfectly legally. That's been causing a lot of the anger.
Okay, so right off the bat, Cenk opens with what he thinks is a mic drop moment. He goes into this whole thing about how foreign-born population in America has gone down by 1 million, and he asks, are we in some sort of immigrant emergency? And then he says the numbers are going down, not up. And I need you to understand something. This is exactly the kind of argument that sounds smart on the surface, but completely falls apart when you actually think about it. Because here is the thing. When someone says the numbers are going down now, what they are really doing is ignoring the 4 years of chaos that happened before. You do not get to flood a country with millions of people, create absolute mayhem at the border, and then when someone finally puts their foot down and the numbers start dropping, you turn around and say, see, there is no emergency. That is like someone setting a house on fire, and then when the fire department shows up and starts putting it out, they go, what fire? The flames are going down. No, the damage is already done. The people are already here. The resources are already being drained. And then Cenk goes into this whole speech about how the donor class is the real problem, and how people want you to look at immigrants so you do not look up at the wealthy elites. And look, I am not going to sit here and pretend that corporate money in politics is not an issue, because it absolutely is. But here is what drives me crazy. You cannot use that as a deflection every single time someone brings up illegal immigration. These are two separate issues. Yes, the wealthy have too much influence. And also, we have a border crisis. Both things can be true at the same time. But what Cenk is doing is classic misdirection. He is saying, do not look at the border, look over there at the billionaires. And I'm sorry, but no, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And then he brings up Chicago. He talks about how residents are frustrated because immigrants are getting stipends while they get nothing. And you know what? He is right about that frustration. But here is the part he does not want to say out loud. Why are those residents getting nothing? Who has been running Chicago for decades? Who has been in charge of those policies? It is not the people complaining about the border. It is the same political machine that Cenk is defending. So the frustration is real, but the blame is misplaced. And Piers actually makes an excellent point here. He says in many cases, asylum seekers are being treated better than people who are already in the country legally. And that is the core of this whole issue. Citizens are struggling. Legal immigrants who did everything the right way are struggling. And meanwhile, people who cut the line are getting resources. How is that fair? How does that make any sense?
Which is now erupting in places around the country.
Yeah, it's the same thing that's happening in the United States of America. It's a lot to unpack here. The government is a fraudulent organization when it comes to this illegal immigration stuff, and most of it is from the Democrat Party. They legitimately, or I wasn't legitimate, but they literally opened up the border and allowed every illegal person that they can possibly find to allow them to come into our country, to flood our cities so they can win elections forever. This is exactly what they did. They don't give a flying flip.
And explain, Officer Tatum, just explain why that would help the Democrats win elections.
Well, when you get an influx of people into certain areas and then you give them amnesty, which is the ultimate plan, now you have more electoral college votes. Now you have more Congress representation. All of those things they can leverage. Now,
why would you assume they'd all want to vote Democrat, though?
Well, let me explain. If you get a bunch of people who have no hope from the country that they came from, and they're believing they come to America, which is utopia, they get all this free stuff, they get all the government funding, and then when you give them amnesty, when you say you are a citizen, you can now stay here, we support you, who do you think they're going to vote for? The party that does that for them. They've done the same thing to black people in this country. They manipulated the black vote by giving them handouts and different things like that, and now they secured the black vote. That's why black people vote unanimously for Democrats, even though Democrats have done nothing for black people in this country. They plan to do the same thing for illegal aliens. They're losing some of the minority votes, so now they have a new demographic. And also, they don't give a F about these people coming over here. Because if they did, they would shut the border down and have them come through a legal process. Because people are getting raped, children are getting sex trafficked. These people, the cartel, are making money coyotes are escorting these people through the desert and leaving them to die. So it's a shame that our government is doing this. And it's not just a minor inconvenience for the American people. We're talking billions of taxpayer dollars spent on housing these people. And they're not just coming over here for a better life. They're unassimilated. They do not want to be a part of America. They want to do their own thing. Their culture is very different than American culture. They're raping people and doing a lot of other things. Now, let me clarify this because I don't want people to take it out of context. It's not every illegal alien that's doing this, but it is enough to be an issue. And we shouldn't even have an issue with this because if you came here illegally, you shouldn't be here in the first place. I don't care if your grandma, nana, whoever it is, built a life here. You built it on illegal terms. That's like me breaking in your house, Piers, and I'm living there. And all of a sudden, I start cooking in your house, and I have a kid, and now my kid live in your house. Somehow, I'm afforded all of the amenities that you've built. No, that don't work like that. You got to.
Now we get to the part where Officer Tatum comes in, and he does not hold back. He calls the government fraudulent on immigration and says Democrats open the border to allow every illegal person they could find to flood cities so they can win elections forever. And look, I know that sounds extreme to some people, but let me ask you a question. If it is not about votes, then why fight so hard against voter ID? Why push back against citizenship verification? Why allow sanctuary cities to exist? You have to understand the long game here, because when you bring in massive numbers of people who are dependent on government assistance, and then one party positions itself as the party that will give them things, what do you think happens? It is not complicated. It is not some wild conspiracy theory. It is basic political strategy that has been used throughout history. You create dependency, and then you leverage that dependency for political power. And then Brandon says something that a lot of people are not willing to say. He talks about how this same playbook was used on the black community. He says Democrats manipulated the black vote with handouts and secured that vote while doing nothing for them. And this is coming from a black man who has seen it firsthand. This is not some outsider making observations. This is someone from within that community saying, "Wake up, this is what is happening." And here is the educational piece that I think people need to understand. This strategy is not new. If you look at political machines throughout American history, going back to Tammany Hall in New York in the 1800s, you see the exact same pattern. Bring in new populations, make them dependent on the machine, secure their loyalty through handouts, and maintain power for generations. This is documented history. This is not speculation. The only difference now is the scale. And then Brandon drops the analogy that honestly sums up this entire debate. He says, building a life on illegal terms is like breaking into someone's house, cooking in their kitchen, having kids there, and then expecting all the amenities that the homeowner built. And people might say that is harsh. But is it? Because what is the alternative? We just accept that if you break the rules long enough, the rules no longer apply to you? That is not how a society functions. That is not how laws work. You gotta go home. You should have never been here in the first place. And I do not know how anyone can argue against that basic logic.
Go home. You got to get out of here. You should have never been here in the first place.
All right, Constantine, you wanted to get in there.
Well, there's a few things that both Cenk and Brandon, the few points that they made, I think are relevant but different in the UK, in particular this Crowborough protest that I spoke to people at. One of the things they were very keen to emphasize is there are hundreds of Ukrainians living in the town or have been living in the town over the last 2 or 3 years, within families, within homes that people welcome them in. But what they're saying is there's a big difference between women and children fleeing war and people who get on a boat in France, throw their passport or their ID in the sea, and then get here and a single man being housed, unvetted, unchecked, etc. So, well, again, I think it's very important. The conversation's been about immigration. This is not about immigration. Both the United States, where I spent a lot of time, Brandon and Cenk have both been on my show when we've been over there, right? You guys both know this. America is the most pro-immigrant country in the world that I've ever been to. UK, probably second or third in terms of some other places that you might compare it to. These are welcoming countries that we live in. We welcome people to come here, start businesses, be contributors. But when you come to this country and you are someone who's deliberately broken the rules in order to get in here, we're right to be suspicious of you, and we should be keeping these people under lock and key so they can't go out into the local community and threaten and menace women, children and residents, elderly residents. And in Crowborough, the place I filmed, do you know that you probably know this, Piers? The police station there is unmanned because it's such a safe place. Now, what happens when you've got hundreds of people running around who you don't know what they are and they've got nothing to do? You've got big problems building up because of that. Just another of the fact, yeah, we've got the same problem that Brandon mentions in the UK, where at one point we were spending £1 million a day on hotels for illegal immigrants, and the cost of housing.
And then Constantine jumps in, and he makes a distinction that I think is so important and often gets lost in these conversations. He points out that there is a massive difference between women and children fleeing an actual war versus single men who get on a boat in France, throw their passport into the sea, and show up demanding asylum. These are not the same thing, and when you try to lump them together, you are being intellectually dishonest. Because think about what throwing away your passport actually means. It means you are deliberately hiding your identity. It means you do not want people to know who you are or where you came from. And why would someone do that if they had nothing to hide? If you are genuinely fleeing persecution, if you are genuinely in danger, why would your first move be to destroy the documents that prove who you are? It does not add up. And the fact that we are not even allowed to ask these questions without being called heartless or racist is insane. And Constantine makes another point that really resonates with me. He says when you deliberately break the rules to get into a country, people are right to be suspicious of you. Not racist, not xenophobic, just reasonably cautious. Because we have seen what happens when you do not vet people properly. We have seen the crimes, we have seen the incidents, we have seen communities completely transformed against their will, and for anyone to act like those concerns are not valid is to completely ignore reality. And here is what really gets me. He says we should keep these people under lock and key so they cannot go out and threaten women, children, and elderly residents. And some people will hear that and say, oh, that is too harsh. But let me flip it around. If you lived in a small, quiet town and suddenly 600 unvetted men from unknown backgrounds were placed right in your community with no supervision and full freedom to roam wherever they want, would you feel safe? Would you let your daughter walk to school alone? Would you feel comfortable with your elderly mother going to the shops by herself? Be honest, because the people who call these concerns racist are usually the people who do not have to live with the consequences. This is not about hating immigrants. This is about protecting citizens. This is about having a system that actually works. And until we can have honest conversations about this, without the name-calling and the deflection, nothing is going to change. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.